fact that he was able to provide that moment and really relieve the burden, which I think in the background had been on him all year with free agency pending, and then go on to play as well as he did in the subsequent series against the Phillies and the Dodgers. I think that that was a turning point in Pete's career, and I would be shocked if he did not have a Pete Alonso standard kind of year, a 45 home run, 130 RBI season. You could just see it with this lineup around him.
Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Spring is the season for new beginnings, and it's the best time to get behind the wheel of a sophisticated new Cadillac SUV. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMeo, and a very special guest, a man that needs no introduction in Gary Cohen. Gary, we are thrilled to have you here for our special season preview, and looking forward to you stopping by all season long throughout 2025. Gary, you've called a lot of games that Juan Soto has played in, but now that he's a Met, you got to see him throughout a spring training. Was there anything different you've learned about him throughout this time?
Well, what I've learned about him is not watching him on the field, it's watching him off the field. I'm not sure that we ever got to see the playful side of Juan Soto when he was with the Nats or the Padres or the Yankees. But there's a dynamic in the Mets clubhouse that does not exist in a lot of places. And anytime you add a superstar player, you're not quite sure how he's going to fit in with that dynamic. And literally from day one, Soto has been a part of the group. He's been laughing. He's been joking. He works as hard and as diligently as anybody in there. But he's got a human side too, and I think that's been the most entertaining thing to see. He's a preternaturally talented player. I mean, the everything that he does is off the charts. Whether it's his ability to recognize strikes from balls, recognize pitches that he can drive, hit the ball with authority, hit the ball over the fence, bat in the zone long, hip rotation. I mean, he is just the perfect hitter. And it seems so far, and you know, spring training can sometimes be deceptive, but he seems like the perfect teammate as well.
So Soto's manager is going to be Carlos Mendoza, who by all accounts had a great first year as manager of the Mets. What do you want to see from him in year two with a different roster of players?
Well, I mean, last year was a magical season. I mean, and this organization obviously is headed in the right direction. They've got ownership with resources. They've got president of baseball operations who has a complete command of every aspect of how you build a team and how you sustain a team. And they've got a manager who I think is going to be among one of the greatest managers we've seen. He's just got the perfect temperament for the job. And I think, you know, it's funny, the day that he was introduced 2 winters ago, I was asked how I thought Carlos Mendoza would do as a manager, and I didn't know Mendy very well at all. You know, he had been on the other side of town with the Yankees, and I said, look, he looked great in the press conference, but what you judge a manager on is how well he does when the first crisis hits. And in his case, first crisis hit like the second day of spring training with Kodai Senga going down. And then an existential crisis happened when the team got off to a horrific start. And he handled all those things as well as a first-year manager ever could. He stayed level. He stayed engaged. He did not panic. He communicated with his players. He made sure that everybody knew what their role on the team was. And, you know, all of those things go together in terms of having a successful season. And what the Mets did last year was nothing short of magical when you consider how badly it started. How it goes in year two, it's a different team. It's a different group. It's a different year. Obviously, Mendoza and everybody else in this organization would love to see the team get off to a better start. But that's why we start playing on Thursday and we find out how that goes.
Funny enough, Gary, it seems like we're having the same exact conversations about the rotation that we had this time last year. Obviously, the depth is going to be tested once again, but also just the questions of how all these new faces will perform. What did you think of the rotation Stearns put together this winter, and who's the guy you're keeping the closest eye on?
Well, I think there are a lot of guys, and I had my own trepidations last year, especially after Senga went down. But seeing how Sean Manaea progressed, seeing how Luis Severino went from barely pitching over the previous 5 years to turning in a spectacular and healthy season and getting deep into his innings count. Seeing David Peterson hit the ground running after hip labrum surgery and pitch as well as he did. The Mets have the um, the mechanisms in place now. Jeremy Hefner clearly is a well-respected pitching coach and has been there through several administrations, but the Mets now have the backbone behind him with their pitching lab and their ability to help pitchers be their best selves. And we've seen it this spring. I mean, Clay Holmes developed two pitches on the fly, right? He developed his kick change and his cutter, which were pitches he really never had before. We've seen Griffin Canning be his best self by changing his pitch mix and adding a cutter. So I put nothing past these guys in terms of their ability to get the best out of these pitchers. But I think it's fair to say that going into the season, the Mets do not have a staff ace. They don't have that number one guy like they had when they had Jacob deGrom, or like they thought they had going into last spring with Kodai Senga. They're hoping Senga can be the best version of himself coming back from basically a year on the sidelines. They're hoping that Clay Holmes can give them enough innings to justify the move from being a relief pitcher to a starting pitcher. They're hoping that Sean Manaea can sustain the success of the second half last year, and that Tyler McGill can take the big step forward. So there are a lot of ifs, and we'll see how it goes. But I think given what we saw last year and given what this organization has become in terms of a pitching uh, refining organization, I think you give them the benefit of the doubt.
When players miss time, it just creates opportunity for others. And Jeff McNeil is going to start the year on the injured list. What have you noticed different about Brett Baty this spring? And can you envision him or even Luisangel Acuna simply not giving that second base job back when McNeil's healthy?
Well, first of all, I said this on the air the other day, and it's really true. Opportunities come, and sometimes timing is everything, right? If Jeff McNeil gets hurt in July instead of in March, maybe we're talking about Jed Williams or Ronnie Mauricio getting an opportunity there, and maybe Brett Baty isn't even in the conversation. But Brett was in the right place at the right time, having had the reps at second base late last season in AAA, that the Mets at least thought he was an option. And then to watch him go out and play as well as he did, forget about the offense. I was shocked watching Brett play second base this spring. I did not think he was nearly as athletic as he's shown off, both with range and body positioning. I mean, the double play that he turned last week, where Lindor went behind the bag and Brett had to spin all the way around and jump and make a throw to first base, I did not think that was going to be in Baty's arsenal so soon. So it's been very impressive watching that, and that certainly gives him an opportunity to thrive at the position. And I think also he's been much more aggressive at the plate. I think that he's been much more determined not to get into bad counts. We've seen him get a lot of extra base hits on first pitches. I think the one thing that we need to see from Brett in the regular season is him being able to handle high octane major league fastballs. That's been the knock on Baty. He's solved his ground ball problem. He's getting the ball in the air more. Now he's got to be able to hit that high octane fastball, and that's what he's going to have an opportunity to do in this first month of the season. Luisangel Acuna, I did not like the way he swung the bat this spring. I thought in many ways he regressed to the way he was swinging the bat in AAA last year. He was not as balanced and as calm as he had been late in the season when he played for the Mets. So I think he's still got something to prove, and it's going to be hard for him to do that in limited at bats. But as long as he's there, he gives them a speed and defense component, and we'll see where it goes from there. As for either one of them taking Jeff McNeil's job, I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Jeff will get the benefit of the doubt when he comes back. He certainly had a terrific second half last year before he got hurt. And, Jeff McNeil at his best is a 900 OPS guy. And I don't think that you take that job away from him lightly.
What are your expectations for Pete Alonso, Gary? I mean, by the standards he's set, which to be fair is really high, it's been a down 2 years by his standards, but this is as good of a lineup as any major league hitter is going to hit it in terms of those top 4 or 5 guys.
Well, he's certainly going to get plenty of RBI opportunities with Lindor and Soto in the lineup ahead of him. I will say this. It's really hard to say this definitively, but the one at bat against Devin Williams last October seemed to have changed something in Pete Alonso. It had clearly been a very disappointing season, and I'd make the case that if he makes an out there or hits into a double play, he might not be a Met right now. But the fact that he was able to provide that moment and really relieve the burden, which I think in the background had been on him all year with free agency pending, and then go on to play as well as he did in the subsequent series against the Phillies and the Dodgers. I think that that was a turning point in Pete's career, and I would be shocked if he did not have a Pete Alonso standard kind of year, a 45 home run, 130 RBI season. You could just see it with this lineup around him. I think that having another star in the lineup, especially hitting in front of him, certainly helps him in that regard. So I really think that the burden that he faced last year, even though he could be a free agent again after this year, is not going to be quite as oppressive as it was last year because of that moment and what came after it.
What are your opinions on captains in baseball? There's a lot of discussion surrounding Francisco Lindor potentially being the next captain of the Mets, and it can be a pretty divisive topic. So what do you think about just the overall concept of having a captain in baseball?
Yeah, I think that in order to have a captain, there has to be one definitive guy. The Mets ran into this in the 80s when Keith was named captain and Gary Carter bristled at it, and eventually they named him a captain as well. And it was not a particularly comfortable situation. And I think you have a similar dynamic here. A lot of people want to anoint Francisco Lindor as the captain, and look, Francisco has been fantastic, and watching his growth as a person and as a leader over the last 4 years has been really fun to watch. But in a clubhouse that also has Brandon Nimmo, I don't think that you can anoint anybody as the captain. I think that making Lindor the captain would be a slight to Nimmo. I don't think anybody has any reason to want to do that, least of all Francisco. I think it's a subject that the Mets are going to wind up leaving alone.
Speaking of captains, Gary, how special will David Wright's number retirement be in July? And piggybacking off of that, this is a combo Joe and I have a lot. What is your overall thought on number retirements that kind of sparks some controversy and debate?
Well, I can only talk so much about this because I'm on the committee that decides those things, and I have been for a long time. And there was a trepidation for a long time about retiring any numbers for players beyond Tom Seaver because of off the field stuff that affected some of the guys whose numbers might have been retired and whose numbers have now subsequently been retired. So I think the logjam has been open. That having been said, you don't want to dilute it too much. However, nobody deserves to have their number retired as a New York Met more than David Wright. He'll be the only player with his number up there on the rafters who played his entire career with the Mets. And when you think about Mets history, there have not been stars who spent their entire career as Mets. And it's not just that, of course, because David was the perfect human being for being the face of the franchise. From the time he came up as a 21-year-old to the day he played his last game and got the thunderous ovations that he got throughout the day in that September game. So I'm so happy for David. Nobody deserves it more. Um, and I am going to be with the 44,000 other people cheering my lungs out when that number goes up in the rafters.
Gary, this is a crazy one to say. What are you looking forward to most as you kick off your 20th year of broadcasting Mets games on SNY?
I'm just looking forward to doing games that matter. I've not made no secret of the fact that I do not love spring training games. I try and do as few of them as possible because the great thing about baseball and baseball broadcasting isn't what happens, it's the moments leading up to what happens. The tension that is involved in baseball because it has pauses in between each moment and the anticipation and the conversation that can lead to the potential of something great happening. That's the best part about baseball. And you don't have that during spring training. And once the season begins, you do because everything matters. I love everything about doing the games. I don't necessarily love the 24-hour nature of the job and the preparation for it. I don't necessarily love the travel and the being away from home, but the 3 hours of the game, especially now that it's 2.5 to 3 hours and not 3.5 to 4 hours the way it was a few years ago. I think that the game itself is just thrilling to me, and I love every minute of it.
Last one for today, Gary, that we've been trying to wrap our heads around. What other Mets seasons can you recall that have as much hype going into them as this one, which is largely because of Soto, but also the way things ended last year as well?
It is my experience as a Met fan and as a Met broadcaster that generally the years with the most anticipation are the ones that have the least payoff. I think about 1992, the worst team money could buy. I think about 2023, coming off 101 wins. I think about 2007, coming off the brilliant team that they had in 2006 and losing in Game 7 against the Cardinals. This franchise has had a habit over the years of letting its fans down when they most expect to have good years. Now, the flip side of that is that you get years like last year or like 1999 where success comes unexpectedly and you are elated beyond words. 1973 certainly fits in that category too. So, I try not to think about expectations. I try and take it, one day at a time. But the one thing that I do know is that the Mets are better equipped right now for sustained success than they have ever been in the 63 plus years of this franchise. They've got an owner with resources. They've got a president of baseball operations who gets it. They've got a great manager. They've got a wonderful superstar in Francisco Lindor, and now they have another one in Juan Soto. And the sky's the limit for this franchise. They've got a lot of top prospects bubbling up at important positions, pitchers and middle of the diamond players that give you great hope for the future. There should be sustained success coming for this franchise, but it's been elusive. I mean, other than a 5-year stretch in the 1980s, it has been really hard for this franchise to sustain success. And it looks like this is the time. We find out starting Thursday.
Gary, it's always such a joy for Joe and I get to talk to you, especially for our season preview episode. I know our listeners really love to hear from you on this format as well. Thank you so much for a couple minutes today, and best of luck into the craziness that is the long Major League Baseball season.
Thank you, guys, and I'll be watching.
Great stuff, as always, from Gary Cohen, Joe. Somebody that we just, we could kind of pull back the curtain here. Like, it feels surreal for us to get to just talk Mets with Gary Cohen, and I think on a podcast format, it's really cool because we're so used to just him in the booth all the time, and you kind of get to just, throw everything at him here. There's no one hitting ground balls to interrupt the conversation, or it's really, really cool. Somebody that's on my Mount Rushmore of broadcasters, as somebody that's into broadcasting now. I'm glad that we're going to get to have a couple different combos with him throughout the course of this season.
No question. I mean, Gary Cohen's to me the best to ever do it. And
Yeah,
the fact that he just hops on a video camera with two schmucks like us to just
I know.
just chop it up about the Mets is pretty special. So yeah, really excited to spend more time with Gary this summer.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SMY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, we did this segment last year, and we're bringing it back. Time for the 2025 version of the Mets Pod temperature check. It's simple. Are we hot, cold, lukewarm on the subject at hand? Joe, I will toss to you first. The topic of the spring, the starting rotation. What do you got for me?
I'm going to go lukewarm. I know there's going to be a lot of Mets fans that are going to be cold because everyone just thinks the rotation's bad. It's not quite there to be hot, but I feel good about Clay Holmes. I feel good about David Peterson. I think Kodai Senga has a chance to have a bounce back season. And a guy like Griffin Canning looked good this spring, looked a little different. There's going to be some young players that make an impact throughout the season. So to me, I'll go lukewarm on the rotation. And the biggest thing, and I think we said this exactly last year, is the rotation just needs to be good enough to not sink the team. It doesn't need to be top. It doesn't need to be top of the sport.
That's the important key for me as well, Joe, why I'm lukewarm. Where if you looked at this team like previous Mets eras, you'd sit there and go, man, like they got to be a top 3 to 5 rotation in baseball to make it where they need to be. And the way this team is built, that's not the way they're going to try to operate, I think, under Stearns until they fully flesh out a farm system of arms. And that's going to take a little while as well. I'm lukewarm on them, and I think that's fine. If Clay Holmes makes the transition that we are all expecting, if David Peterson has this year where he puts it all together, not spurts or stretches of it, you eventually get Manaea healthy. Senga's a gigantic variable that's just so hard to predict with the health, but I'm lukewarm on this one as well. The next one is the bullpen, which I'm also lukewarm on. I think the Mets have really good depth in their bullpen, and that's a key difference from last year. Joe, we've talked a lot about the spring that Max Kranick has had. Obviously, you have Minter now here. The need for a shutdown kind of lefty in the bullpen last year was very, very glaring. I want to see Edwin Diaz find his form again fully throughout the course of the regular season, and it's easier to be confident about that when he's had a normal ramp-up period, not a rehab offseason ramp-up period. So I'll go lukewarm on this one as well.
I'm actually going to go hot on the bullpen. David Stearns has historically building bullpens is something that he's always been very good at. And his first year here, it was a bit of a transition where there was a lot of times where the bullpen was a problem. And I think now they have more proven arms in the pen. And there's still those flyers, so to speak, like the Kranicks and the Brazobans and guys like that at the bottom end of the bullpen, at least to start the year. But having Edwin Diaz to close games, and as you said, we want to see a bounce back from Diaz, but even his not as good season was still, a pretty good closing season. You get a proven guy in AJ Minter. Jose Buto showed that the bullpen is a great fit for him. Reed Garrett, I look at now as much more of a proven guy. Last year, when he made the bullpen, no one really knew who Reed Garrett was. And I think the depth that you spoke of, in addition to having more of those solidified veterans that you could almost count on, I think this is going to be a vintage David Stearns bullpen year with the Mets.
All right, I'll throw you the alley-oop, the easy layup here, Joe, the lineup.
I think I'm kind of cold. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, we're hot on the lineup. You got 2 MVP candidates in Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto. You have Pete Alonso, who Gary Cohen just told us he thinks he's going to hit 45 homers and drive in 130. You have an emerging star in Mark Vientos. Brandon Nimmo. It was a tale of 2 halves for Nimmo last year, where he could have made the All-Star team based on his first half, and the second half was a struggle. I think if you could get a more consistent year out of Nimmo, that's huge. And the lineup just gets deeper when you get to the bottom when Francisco Alvarez makes his way back. I think this lineup has a chance to be, one of the top 2 to 3 lineups in the sport. So how could you not be hot on it?
Yeah, I mean, scorching on it. It's the fact of the way they built the top of it. It's insane. You have some young talent. We know what Vientos is capable of. Obviously, Baty needs to carry his spring over, but that's not even a necessity. If Baty's an average major leaguer, that's a gigantic win because the top five in this lineup, Joe, are really what's going to drive it. And you make an important point about Nimmo, who such an interesting year last year in both April and May in OPS over 700, in June in OPS over 1,000, and then July to the end of the season, it was under 700. So the glass half full to me is, Joe, they might have the depth now to keep guys healthy, where if you're getting guys off their feet, maybe they're not kind of burning out the second half of the season. And that could be a combination of Nimmo, Marte. Obviously, you have some center field depth and some young guys in the system as well. So hopefully that brings out the best version of Nimmo, who, if he finds that earlier form and carries it through the rest of the season, this lineup's going to be a really, really tough out across the board. The defense, Joe, I'm going to be honest with you. This might surprise you. Right now, I'm cold on the defense. And I'll tell you why. I know where the Mets are insanely strong. They have an incredible shortstop in Francisco Lindor. Pete, for sometimes the lack of range, although it's gotten a lot better, is incredible digging the ball out. That's an area where he is really, really impressive. Obviously, Jose Siri in center field is one of the best defensive center fielders in the National League. Then I just have questions across the board, Joe. You need Vientos to just be average at third. Baty's looked good in the spring at second base, but there's going to be ups and downs. Soto and Nimmo at the corners. Nimmo more health related. Soto, has his adventures in the outfield. Yeah. But the reason that this isn't lukewarm is because Francisco Alvarez is such a difference maker behind the plate, and they're going to miss him at the start of the season. When he's back, I have no doubts the Mets will be an above average defensive team. But man, Joe, we've seen him, and it's nothing against Terens, who can't play every day. It's just the fact that Alvarez, to me, is a difference maker behind the plate that is impossible for this team to replace defensively.
I thought I was going to have the hot take and be cold on the Mets defense, but I'll share that one with you where, as you mentioned, behind the plate, I think they're going to miss the leadership that Alvarez provides. Terens and I think Hayden Sanger has a good chance to be the backup catcher. Yeah. They're going to get better throwing, I think, than they were getting from Alvarez when those guys are in the game. But Alvarez's leadership behind the plate is big. Alonso, like you said, his strength is truly in picking the ball out of the dirt. It's not range. It's certainly not throwing arm. Second base, we got to see how that kind of all shakes itself out. Jeff McNeil is going to be back. It's not like he's out for months and months. So what does second base look like? That's going to be a big question. And as much as Mark Vientos made strides defensively at third base last year, he still was, ultimately well below average by any fielding metric that you could find. But that was coming off the expectation of Mark Vientos can physically not play third base. So below average felt like a big win. If he could take maybe a step forward, that'll help. If he could become an average defensive third baseman. And I'm definitely worried about the corners like you are, Connor. Soto, as we know, he's not going to be a defensive whiz. I think people are going to overhype the low lights where he'll occasionally miss a ball or whatever, but he's, certainly a at best average right fielder, more of a below average one. And Nimmo, as you mentioned, with the injury stuff, plantar fasciitis he's coming off, and he had to get an injection in his knee. So I'm wondering if Nimmo takes a step back defensively. And to your point with the depth, I think there might be times in game where you take Nimmo out and put Tyrone Taylor in left to kind of improve the defense late in games. But yeah, I'll go cold on the defense with a chance to be lukewarm.
All right, it's time. We've waited way too long for this. It's maybe our favorite segment of the year. It's up there. Our 2025 predictions. And when I say favorite, a lot of it is I just like looking back and kind of laughing with how things change. The baseball season is so long that names that'll be mentioned in these predictions don't necessarily even finish the season with the team. That's the fun in it. And sometimes we'll throw some darts out there that turn into home runs. So, Joe, let's start with our, craziest or second craziest prediction in biggest surprise. Who do you think is, and this is so hard because we come off of spring training and now everybody's buying into the hype of Baty and Clay Holmes, but you don't have to go too deep in the weeds on this. Who do you think will be the biggest surprise, maybe from a national level, on this Mets team?
I'm going to go with my guy, Max Kranick, which maybe is not a surprise to so many people because he's kind of also become one of the spring training cult heroes. But where I'm going to say he's the biggest surprise, it's not the fact that he made the major league roster, or is likely to make the major league roster, I should say. It's not the fact that he's throwing a little harder this spring. He's up to 97. He's got his cutter, his sweeper. He's mixing in a good pitch mix. The reason I'm going to say Kranick is going to be the biggest surprise is I think he's going to end up by the end of the year being the third highest leverage reliever in the bullpen behind only Diaz and Minter. I'm big on Max Kranick, and I expect big things from him in 2025.
I'm going to go with Jose Siri. And the reason being that is I don't need Siri to, punch above his weight and turn into this 265 hitter or necessarily hit, 30 home runs or anything like that, Joe. But I think, one, we know the defense is going to play in center field for Jose Siri. That is why he is here, and we've already seen plenty of examples of that in the spring. Two, he feels like a guy that with the kind of edge he plays with and the raw power, Joe, he'll have a couple moments that Met fans really cling on to this year. That Siri all of a sudden, like we've seen this in the past with certain players. I remember the first half of last year, even Harrison Bader, it just felt like he had so many clutch moments at the plate. I think Siri is somebody that will surprise a lot of people because there's so much star talent in this lineup. I mean, he's going to be hitting 8th or 9th in the order. It's as simple as that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him have some moments. A fun one here, Joe. Who has more wins? And I can't tell if this is trolling by our producer Jeff, but we're gonna roll with it. Kodai Senga or Griffin Canning? The hero of the Mets pod, Griffin Canning, by the way.
Well, the hero, at least for me, and I don't know so much about you anymore. But when it comes when it comes to wins, what makes this actually interesting is even though Griffin Canning struggled last year, and we've talked about it a million times, he was one of the worst pitchers in baseball for the Angels, yada yada. He still threw 175 innings. So Griffin Canning's a guy that's going to take the ball every 5th or 6th day. You cannot rely on that with Kodai Senga based on how last year went. With that said, I will err on the side of Kodai Senga because I think depending on how the season goes for Canning, he could get squeezed out of the rotation at some point. And the only way Senga is not making starts is if he's on the injured list. So I will side with Senga, but my prediction is it'll be much closer than people may think.
Right, and I think that's the point. I think that if you were playing odds, you factor in opportunity above all else. And whenever Senga is healthy and able to pitch, he is going to be out there pitching for the Mets throughout the course of the year. And obviously, it's a big factor, him being healthy. So far, so good, we think. Canning, like you said, Joe, there's no guarantee of that. There's going to be plenty of opportunity where, hey, the Mets need Griffin Canning because they're dealing with a lot of injuries or they're dealing with a doubleheader or whatever it may be. But just based off of the opportunity and talent, you have to go with Kodai Senga. But if the injuries persist in this rotation and Canning all of a sudden makes 14 to 15 starts, would it really? And Senga.
Oh, it's over 14 or 15 starts for Canning.
Okay, you're hammering that. And what would you set Senga's line at? 19?
17?
I'd say lower. Yeah, I'd go lower. It's after a guy misses a season.
Yeah, something like that. And, it's not necessarily that Senga will go on an extended IL stint like he did last year. It could just be some soreness and he misses 2 weeks here and there. But I would put his around 17. And I think Griffin Canning will start 20 plus. Like I think he's going to get a lot of starts this year.
All right. Well, then, for you, it would be, it is really close. I will say Senga, but my hot take and my joke take in our text thread I was like, both guys are going to have 6 wins. And I really hope that's not the case, obviously. But yeah, I think it will be closer. This one, I'll just get out in front, Joe. I'm smashing the over. Pete Alonso home runs over under 40. He had 34 last year. I am on the side with Gary Cohen. I don't know if he'll get to 45. I'd be thrilled if he did. But I think he'll be in that low 40s range where the power is all there for Pete this year. And I love playing this over everywhere.
Yeah, I'm over on Alonso home runs for especially at that 40 number. I think it's 43, 44, something like that. I think we're in for more of a vintage Pete Alonso year. And when we circle back, after hopefully the Mets win the World Series, but whenever the season ends and we circle back and we get into 2025 off-season time, I look forward to the debates of keeping Pete Alonso, pursuing Vladimir Guerrero Jr., or what the Mets want to do, because I think Pete's going to put that pressure on him.
All right, our next one here is Juan Soto home runs, which is set at 36, the over under. He had 41 last year. And what's fascinating with Soto at 26 years old, he's gradually been climbing now. He hit 41 last year, 35 the year before that. He hit, I believe, 2022, he hit 27. He's been hovering, Joe, like higher and higher each year. What do you think of this number? And do you think Soto can top it?
I like the over, but I do think it's going to be close. I think to your point, Soto, we forget how young he is at times. Like we just don't even think about it. Where he's just getting more advanced and more advanced as a hitter. Andy Martino joked on Twitter during the game against the Yankees that the ABS system should just be Juan Soto telling you if it's a ball or a strike because he knows the strike zone that well. And as he has continued to evolve his plate discipline and pitch recognition skills, he's now shown the ability to jump on the pitch that's there. So I like over 36, but I think it's going to be 37, 38. I don't know if he's going to break 40 again.
Right. I'm actually going to take the under, and it is a tough one. As a 20-year-old, he hit 34, and then 2021, 2022, he was under 30. And lately, last 2 years, he's been 41 and 35. So this is a truly unpredictable one because my take is, Joe, Soto doesn't need to hit over 36 home runs to have an elite season. He's just that special of a hitter, getting on base, obviously driving the ball, just a pure hitter that, sluggers like Pete, in a sense, that might have a wider swing range at pitches they will go after. They are trying to hit the home run. Soto doesn't even when you see some of his home runs, it doesn't look like he's selling out for the home run almost ever. So I'll go under. I think he hits over 30 home runs this year and has a phenomenal season, but I think it's one of the trickier lines across the home run market.
Regardless, Connor, what I'm most excited for is just to watch Juan Soto at bats every single day.
Yeah.
That's what I can't wait to do. Like, you want to watch a true master at his craft. It's a good thing that we're as Met fans going to get to be able to watch 162 or however many games he plays of Juan Soto every single day, and I can't wait.
All right, our next one here. What month does Brandon Sproat make his major league debut? So we've answered this in the past, Joe. I'm curious if your answers change. I've said July for a while. You've been on the earlier side for this.
I'm going to say June, but it won't shock me if it's that late. Like, I'm thinking around Memorial Day is where I'm targeting. If he could go to AAA Syracuse and make the strides kind of necessary with his command within the confines of the strike zone, I think Sproat will be a quick riser. And I liken it a lot to what Christian Scott did last year, where he came up, I believe it was early June against Tampa for his debut. And I look at Sproat as a late May into June. So I'll say June just to give myself an extra few days.
What month does Drew Gilbert make his major league debut, Joe?
This is a tough one because I don't believe Drew Gilbert is going to start the year on the AAA roster. I believe he's going to be a little behind as he's still working his way back from the hamstring issues that he's dealt with over the last, now 11 months, essentially. So it's a tricky situation when it comes to Gilbert. But I do think if he could get healthy, he could get on the field consistently, I do think he'll perform at the AAA level. And depending on what happens in center field with your guy, Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor, I think Gilbert should push for getting an opportunity at some point this year. And I will say July for a month, give him some time to get healthy, get right, perform, and then an opportunity arise. So I'll go July.
How much center field do you think Jet Williams plays this year?
It's a good question. I would like to see more of it because he's only got into 33 games in center field, and his athleticism pops off the page when he's out there. He could cover gap to gap, shows the ability to go back on balls, come in on balls. But the thing that I have noticed is sometimes his reaction is like a tick late, where it's not that he's not getting to the ball, it's that it becomes much more of a difficult play than maybe it needs to be. So I would like to see a lot more Jet who in center field, and he'll start with AA Binghamton and, hopefully make it up to AAA at some point during the summer. But my hope is the Mets expose him much more to center field than they have previously.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna see Gilbert, honestly, until late August, early September, when this team, can bring him up and give him some looks and have some depth and athleticism on the bench. I think the reality is right now you have both Siri and Tyrone Taylor, who are major league center fielders. And yeah, those guys are typically more you'd think as fourth outfielders, but the amount of offense the Mets have, they can put them in the lineup as a platoon and just bet on their defense and not need that kind of offense from them where sure things can change, but just the health concerns Gilbert has had, Joe, for a guy that isn't like we think offensively, Jet has a lot more upside. It's just tough to sit here and say, oh man, the Mets are really waiting on Drew Gilbert anymore.
Yeah, I don't think Drew Gilbert is like that part of the plan. Like this time last year, I think they signed Harrison Bader with the idea that Drew Gilbert was going to go
Right.
smash in AAA Syracuse and make his way up in that Memorial Day to June range. And obviously that didn't work out. He missed most of the year with an injury. At this point, you do wonder if the Mets are looking at Drew Gilbert as like the future at insert position here, which basically is center field because 2/3 of the outfield is locked in for the long term, but doesn't mean he can't have a role.
The next one is who starts the most games at second base for the Mets in 2025? So we even got Gary Cohen's prediction on this, Joe. He was, pretty decisive in saying Jeff McNeil. McNeil's in an interesting situation here where he's got 3 years left on his contract, but that third year is a club option. So it kind of looks like more you would think in the 2 years, unless the Mets are picking up a $16 million salary for a 35-year-old Jeff McNeil. I'm still going to lean that it's McNeil, Joe, because it's a big ask of Baty to just all of a sudden be a major league everyday second baseman. And I'm not saying it can't happen because in the spring right now he's showing everybody that he thinks it can, but there's still a lot left to see before we could sit there and roll with that where for all his struggles and frustrations, when McNeil is having one of his good halves, and it feels like he has a good half and a bad half every single year, his good half is the type of player that hitting sixth or seventh in your lineup can really, really lengthen this lineup. We know he's responsible defensively, and I just don't think Mendoza, not just because of the 2 years left on this deal, Joe, but for what McNeil's done in his major league career, is just going to completely discard him when he's back.
The reason I'm also going with Jeff McNeil, it's not necessarily an indictment on Brett Baty or anything like that. I think the Mets issue is going to be that they have too many of these young players
Yeah.
kind of pushing for an opportunity. So can one of them establish themselves not only above McNeil, who, as you said, veteran, proven, had that great second half up until he got hurt in September, can one of these young players not only go over McNeil, but go over the other two young players? Like you're talking about Brett Baty, you're talking about Luisangel Acuna, and I think Ronnie Mauricio is going to be a factor on this team at some point in the 2025 season. And I know he's kind of still a little out of sight, out of mind because he didn't get into any spring training games, and he certainly wasn't available at all in 2024. I think at this point, McNeil's versatility will help him throughout the year give opportunities to some of these young players, but I just wonder if there's one of them that'll take enough of a stranglehold on the position that they would get more games at second than McNeil.
This is the favorite one, Joe. That's why I corrected myself on the biggest surprise because this is always the best one. Jeff just comes up with outrageous scenarios and we pick the most likely one to happen. And more likely than not, none of them will. But man, it'll be pretty electric if one of them do. Pick one to happen. A Hayden Sanger, Louis Torrens, or any non-Alvarez catcher grand slam, a Mark Vientos cycle, a no-hitter, which it can be a obviously committee.
Combined.
Yeah. No-hitter or how about a platoon
A
no-hitter?
platoon no hitter.
Someone on the team to hit an inside the park home run or a 15-inning game that is exactly no less or no more 15 innings.
All right, let's go order of likelihood. I would say the least likely thing to happen to me is a Mark Vientos cycle.
Yeah.
Boy, do I love Mark Vientos as a hitter and as a player and such a hard worker. But running at times looks like it's in quicksand a little bit. So I don't know if the triples are necessarily in Vientos's future. So I will say that's not going to happen. a combined no-hitter can happen. And that's a good point. It has to be combined, because I think we're honestly getting away from the days of complete game starting pitcher no-hitters. Those are going to be so few and far between. Someone to hit it inside the park home run, they'd have to get like a really fun bounce, because
They're not a very
it's not,
athletic team.
yeah, it's not that level of speed on the roster. These, with the runner on second in extra innings, we're not seeing these games last much more than 11 innings anymore. So I don't know
No.
if we're going to see 15. So by process of elimination, I'm going to go with a non-Alvarez catcher grand slam. And all it takes is the depth of the lineup in front of them, just putting
I
people on
agree.
base, and they just pop one over the wall.
I completely agree with you, Joe. And I really wanted us to go different directions with this one. But
Yeah.
here's the thing. Alvarez is going to be out for a little bit. And even when he's back, these guys still have to play every week. Terrence has got a little. We've seen Sanger have some pop this spring, which I did not know about at all. The other ones, is it likely that one of the backup catchers hits a grand slam? No, it's not likely. But it feels significantly more likely than Vientos to hit a triple. Somebody has to fall down. And somebody, sadly enough, somebody has to crash into the wall. I'm sorry, but that's the only, and it could happen, but it's not likely, because if he hits the triple and somebody falls down, he still needs to hit the home run, the double, and the single on top of it. So you're talking about, like, this is the parlay rule. If you're playing a 4-leg parlay, you are going to probably lose. But so that's the Vientos problem. The no-hitter one has a little bit of the parlay effect, Joe, because you are counting on more than one person to have their absolute best on that day. But ironically enough, the no-hitter might be third for me. Like, I think I go backup catcher, grand slam, inside the park home run, because they do happen in the sport. People fall down, and there's not a ton of speed on this team, but Lindor is fast enough. Acuna is fast enough. Siri and Nimmo are fast enough. They're not a slow team. They're just not a very fast team. They're kind of right in the middle. So that would be number 2. No-hitter would be 3 combined. I think Vientos' cycle is 4. I think the 15-inning game is the least likely. I really do.
That's probably right. That's honestly probably right.
Are designed that we never have another 15-inning game. So,
you know what?
That's where I
Connor,
land.
that inside the park home run, Jose Siri, that screams what you're just talking about a couple of minutes ago, where he has that moment where we watch Mets Yearbook 2025 on SNY, and
hosted by Steve Gelbs.
Hosted by Steve Gelbs as always. And Jose Siri gets the grand slam and head first sliding the home, gets up, arms out, maybe rips his shirt open. Who knows what Jose Siri's going to do.
Throws his helmet at the opposing dugout, and the fight breaks out. And all right, the next one, these are already posted. You could check out all on SMY's social platforms with some really cool graphics of the entire MLB staff made predictions for the year. And it's not just limited to this. There's all kinds of predictions. Mets over under 92 wins, Joe. My number for them was 91. What was yours?
Mine was 95. So I was over. I feel really good about this team. And I think the best part about it, it's not just how good the roster looks right now. I think this is going to be the trade deadline that David Stearns and this front office make that splash. They have held on to prospects since David Stearns has been here, other than, the couple trades at the deadline last year where they gave up some guys that I had ranked in the 20s in the system. I could see this being the year that they make that impactful trade. And then on top of already having great players, I think this is a year where the Mets take a significant step forward.
So the follow-up, of course, was, do they make the playoffs? With our win totals, obviously they do. Joe, you had them finishing second in the division. So did I, despite our 4-win differences. I had them as the first wild card. Did you?
Yes, I had them as the first wild card. I think the NL East is going to be a wagon. I have them finishing right behind Atlanta. I think it's going to be a tight race. If you tell me you have Philly winning the East,
that's what I did.
I believe it. If you told me you had the Mets winning the East, I believe it. I think these are 3 teams that are very close, and it's going to come down to the wire to see how it all works out. And I think they're all going to be 90-win teams, and the Nationals and Marlins might get beat up on a little bit. And I was thinking about it, Connor, when I was doing these predictions. Like, we know how good the Dodgers are, and the Padres are a pretty good team, and Diamondbacks are like a little sneaky. The NL Central, to me, is a very confusing division. I didn't know exactly who to pick to win. I just took the Cubs because they kind of did the most this winter.
Right.
But I think the Central is a division that teams in the East and a team like the Dodgers, they're going to feast on those teams when they face them throughout the year.
So I did what you did last year. I took the Cubs last year because I was like, they usually make some moves and I like this team. And then they totally let me down. So I just picked the Brewers because I'm just going to bet on history at this point, which ironically, I think Kyle Tucker can win the MVP. So that would probably change things for the Cubs, but it's the rest of the team that really needs to put it together. I think we landed on the same exact scenario. We both had the Mets as wild card 1. I had them in the NLCS, though, despite that, Joe. You did too. Losing to the Dodgers.
Yeah, we had the same exact scenario.
Here's my thought. You picked the Braves to win the division. I picked the Phillies. I think the depth of the Phillies rotation, which is awesome, leads to them winning the most games in the NL East during the regular season. And I think they run into the same exact problem they ran into last year, that they can't close out playoff games. And when the rotations are condensed, it levels the playing field for everybody else, where you go, oh man, the Phillies 3, 4, and 5 are as good as anyone in the National League. Then when you get to the playoffs and you go, oh, everybody's starting the same 3 guys, and you really just got to attack bullpens, that's where I like the Mets better. So despite the Mets being a wild card team for me, I like them to go further, and I still think the Dodgers are the best team in the National League.
Yeah, the Dodgers, I mean, I think we're genuinely looking at like 110 wins from the Dodgers. I think we're looking at that type of season. On paper, I don't know if I've ever seen a better team. And if you told me that I could do the Dodgers versus the field, just like a general bet, I'll take the field, I guess. But if I have to specifically pick who's going to beat the Dodgers, I can't pinpoint it.
Yeah, it's pretty tough, man. I mean,
you can. You picked the Orioles to win the World Series. So
I did pick the Orioles to win the World Series. Yeah, I think that, which is a little bit more fun than just telling everybody the Dodgers are going to win the World Series again. I think the Orioles just arrived too early, and now everybody reset their expectations too low. That's my thought with that. For context, the Dodgers are plus 140 to win the National League. That is to win the entire National League. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong over the stretch of a baseball season, and they are plus 140. To show the gap, the next teams are the Braves and the Phillies, who are plus 500, plus 650, and then the Mets are kind of all over the place, but you can find them at plus 700. I mean, that just goes to show you how heavily, like, for people that are like, oh, the Dodgers are getting too much hype, you could feel that way, but the books are telling you that they are the runaway to win the National League, which is not common in a sport with as many variables as baseball. So that's where Joe and I landed. We picked the kind of the same result as last year for our predictions. Some good news to kind of end the our prediction segment here. The scoreboard will be back next week, Joe, and I am finally going to win the title this year, despite a lot of people setting me as a plus 800 underdog, because you have won the scoreboard title. And if you're new to the Mets pod, Joe and I make predictions every single week. They're all over the place, from, well, Starling Marte hit a home run this week, which I say yes every time and he never does, to all kinds of crazy stuff.
There's minor league stolen bases.
Yeah, well, that's why you win. The last 2 months is all minor league stuff, and Joe just cleans up. Well, Griffin Canning have over 3.5 strikeouts. So if you want to play with us, write them down, join us. You can tweet them at us. We have a lot of fun with the scoreboard. I'm looking forward for it to be back next week. Let's go down on the farm and kind of start the mailbag at the same time here, Joe. Jimenez 701 on YouTube. Thank you for the question. Which prospect do you think is the best for different categories? Example, command, power, contact, velocity. Let's just go with those 4 categories, Joe.
Yep.
Before you just take the floor, do I win by saying Clifford gets power?
Yes, you do win. Okay. Ryan Clifford.
Okay, I got one of the 4. I'll let you do the other 3.
Yeah. And I made it a point, and I think these guys are the answers, but we're not talking about Brandon Sproat. We're not talking about Jonah Tong or Nolan McLean. These not the top of the system kind of guys. So we'll stick offensively because we went with Clifford on the power, which, everyone saw the spring breakout game, the 106 mile an hour, 450-foot home run. It's plus power from Clifford.
What do you think he weighs right now, Joe?
He's a big boy.
He's gigantic. He looks like a linebacker.
When we were next to him, he looks every bit of 240. I don't know
thought
what
so
he
too.
I don't know what he's listed at, but he looks every bit of 240.
He's
Uh,
still listed because I love Baseball Reference.
they
It's
never
a
update him.
godsend, but they don't up like it's the Ronnie Mauricio
Yeah,
160 thing.
yeah,
He's listed
yeah,
at 200, which that's probably 3 years old. So I would say he's
yeah.
probably at least 230.
Yeah, he's a big boy. On the contact side, I'm going to go with Nick Morabito, who I have as the 14th ranked prospect in the system. He hit 312 last year between St. Lucie and Brooklyn, and kept his K rate around 18%. So this is a guy that knows how to put the ball in play. And as we move forward through the 2025 season, you want to see him start to elevate the ball a little more and be more aggressive, hitting line drives in the gap. But from just a pure bat the ball standpoint, I think Morabito is the best in the system. And if we go to the pitching side here, start with velocity. A lot of people would think I would pick Brand Sproat because he, is in the mid to upper 90s. He'll touch 100, 101. Well, let me tell you about Raymond Gomez, who is coming off Tommy John surgery, and he will be back in game action this spring. He threw some bullpens this spring down in Port St. Lucie, including one when we were there. He's number 28 on my list in my top 30, so he's just really at the back end, and I look at him as a future reliever. But how does averaging 100 miles an hour and touching 103 sound?
That
So
works.
that's what you get with Raymond Gomez, and he has a slider as well. So I think he could be a fast-moving two-pitch reliever. And on the command side, a lot of the top pitching prospects, when you talk about Sproat and McLean and Tong and all of those guys, there are some control and command things that they need to work through. I'm going to go with this past year's third-round pick, Nate Dome, who the Mets drafted out of Mississippi State. He only walked 16 guys in 71 and a third innings at Mississippi State. He's known as a strike thrower. He'll get into the mid 90s. So there's some good stuff to go along with it. But when you're just talking about a natural ability to throw strikes, I'll go with Nate Dome, who I had number 20 in my latest top 30.
All right. I like the superlatives for prospects. Kind of gives us
Yeah.
a nice way to sum up where the farm system stands after spring training. And maybe we'll redo this question every 2 months throughout the season as things kind of change. And guys, like you said, Joe, guys graduate as well.
Right.
All right, let's jump into the rest of the mailbag. This from Jason Russo on Twitter. What do you need to see from Acuna and Baty to avoid being demoted when McNeil returns? Joe, for me, I don't know. One, Baty just has to hit, obviously. But I think the Acuna conversation to me, Joe, is if the Mets don't want a player that young to be a utility guy, then there's nothing he could do. Like, they are going to want him to play every day. And if there's not a place for him to play every day, he's going to go back to Syracuse where he could play every day. And reading through the cracks here, with the Mets being interested in another infield bat, they might feel that way right now. What do you think?
Barring injury, there's just no way that one of them doesn't get demoted when Jeff McNeil comes back. Just the process of putting a roster together. You're not going to cut one of the outfielders that are here to keep one of the young players, and there's not another infielder to get rid of either. So when Jeff comes back, it's going to be a decision the Mets have to make is, on Luisangel Acuna. Do they want to look at him as a super sub type of player, which there are plenty of evaluators and scouts that I've talked to that say that's what he's going to be. He's not
That's
going
fine.
to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the Mets need to decide, do they want to kind of commit to that now? Or do they, to your point, want him to get more at bats down at AAA Syracuse, where, as good as everything was when he came up in September in Lindor's absence, the AAA season was a tough one for him. While Baty, on the other hand, I feel like it's really tough to send him back to AAA. What's the point?
There's nothing to gain. There's nothing to gain.
Like, he'll just go there and hit 375 and hit a home run every other day. I will tweet it and I will get a million responses for a player, for a player, for a player. So let's avoid those. I think Baty, if he can show some defensive chops at second base, I think that increases his possibility of sticking as a lefty bench bat. And I think Acuna, it'll be a lot about how the Mets feel about him long term, and I think it'll be shown in the move they make whenever McNeil's back.
This next one from Michael Matalovich 542 on YouTube. Hey, what's a good way to get your guys' attention if we come to see you during a live show? I saw you guys filming, live streaming outside Citi Field and wanted to say hi or at least get your attention as a fan, but didn't want to mess up the taping or make anyone lose train of thought. Number one, very, very polite of you. I would say the easiest way is we always announce on the podcast the week leading up to the show or weeks leading up to the show what time we're going to record. We're hanging out at least a half hour before every single time. We get to talk to a ton of people. We have a really good time. We've, over the last couple live shows, and it probably wasn't this one, Michael, you were at for Citi Field, but a lot of live shows, we've now had sound set up that during the show, the mailbag portion, which is usually the second half of the show, we have people come up and ask questions on the show. Like your voice will be on the show, you introduced on the show, and then we always hang out after. Sometimes that could be a little close to first pitch where most people like to go into the stadium by then, and whether they like to watch BP or whatever it may be. But yeah, before and after, Joe and I are always hanging around, having a good time. If you ever see us in the stadium, and when we go to the games after our live shows, we just walk around a ton. Please come over and say hello. We love chatting with everybody that listens to this show, Joe. It's one of the most rewarding parts about doing the podcast.
Yes, please come say hi. I know Connor's very intimidating, big star, very intimidating. So Connor's a different breed than me. You know, I'm just so outgoing, and you come up and talk to me, I will talk your ear off. So feel free.
Yes. I will drop you off next to Joe, and you will have your next 45 minutes booked. So think about that, everybody.
Yeah, please come up and say hi. The only thing is, if we're clearly talking into microphones, don't scream at us because I will get distracted. Connor won't. I will.
I'll power through.
But as Connor said before, we're always there, usually at least a half hour, if not a little longer, before a show starts, and then afterwards we hang out for a little bit while things are kind of being disassembled. And yeah, please come up, say hi, because we just love talking to you all, and the fact that you guys listen to us every week, it's flattering. So come up and say hi.
Our final one on our season preview episode, and it wouldn't be a season preview episode without a mailbag question from Steve Miller. Level of concern for Brandon Nimmo's health status as the Mets start the season. I mean, Joe, the good news is that home run looks pretty good against the Yankees to cap off spring training. I mean, the questions people are going to have is how much outfield can Nimmo's body handle this year? I look at this two ways, Joe, to be honest with you. I have no concerns in the short term about Brandon Nimmo. He's just a guy that will play through things, and I think it was wise how they were careful with him this spring. On the flip side of it, I'd be sitting here and lying if I told you that things are not piling up with Nimmo, and he's still a really good major league player that we haven't hit the crossroads of. Like, there's been conversations on the show over the years. Has Jeff McNeil's body just failed him? Where the reigning batting champ days of Jeff McNeil are behind him because he's just had injuries piling up. And then he'll have spurts where he looks like that guy again. But we've had those combos. That's not the door we're opening with Brandon Nimmo. Where is Brandon Nimmo not the same guy he once was? I actually think the power most of the time looks better. But, Joe, I think the combo will have to be, and the Mets have, obviously an incredible sports science department that's done a really good job of this in this era, of how much do you want Brandon Nimmo on his feet in the outfield throughout a 162-game season that can impact when you need the best version of Brandon Nimmo in the postseason. And like we said, we read the numbers that the first 3 months of the year last year were great. The last 3 months of the year were not the same caliber. So that's the battle with Nimmo. I guess the shortest, concise way I can answer it is I'm not concerned about Nimmo changing as a player. I'm concerned about not getting the best version of him when we need him to get this team to a World Series. And that's on the job of the Mets to figure out.
I'm not so concerned about Nimmo's health and readiness when you look at it that way. I think he's ready to go for Thursday against the Astros.
Right.
I think
and he's tough.
And he's a tough guy. He's going to battle through a lot of things. But when I look at this, I think this is the year where the Mets, and to your point, this is on their sports science department, their training department. This is going to be the year, and it might be this way, honestly, for the rest of the contract or most of the rest of his contract here. You're going to have to manage Brandon Nimmo a little bit. I know he wants to be out there every day and he wants to get at bats. And, maybe some days he gets the half day off. He gets a DH day, right? And there's going to be days that you just sit Brandon Nimmo. And I don't think it necessarily has to be just against a lefty. There can be a day where, they get the GPS data. You've heard how into it Brandon Nimmo is this spring.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I'm running at 91%. And so he's into that information, and the fact that they are able to do that now and how they've advanced to the point where it's not just give him a day off for the sake of giving him a day off. There's data behind the decision. And I think Nimmo is someone that you're just going to manage throughout the year. And I think that's the advantage that the Mets have in having someone like Tyrone Taylor on the bench, someone with Jeff McNeil's versatility, where if you are playing Baty at second, McNeil could fill in left field for a day. And I think managing Nimmo will be more important than necessarily my concern about him being healthy. But, we're dealing with now two kind of lower body things. It's the foot that, he's battling through, and the knee had to get the injection. So a lot of management, I think, is in store for Brandon Nimmo in 2025.
Which, fortunately, this team has proven veteran depth in the outfield. Starling Marte, you mentioned Taylor, you mentioned McNeil's versatility. But there might be a conversation a year or two from now, and it's not that Nimmo won't be an everyday player anymore, but how important that depth can be from the system. Can one of Drew Gilbert or even a version of Jet Williams in the outfield at times, or a
Carson
player like
Bench.
Carson Bench is a great one because he's a college hitter, first round pick. So I think the trajectory is a little quicker, you would think, for him to the major leagues, Joe. Obviously we need to see him play in the minors this year, but you would hope that Bench can maybe be in that conversation in 2026 as well, right?
I have him as an ETA for 26. I think he'll start out in Brooklyn. As long as the batted ball data is good, get him up to AA as quick as possible. I don't want him hanging out in Brooklyn and hitting fly balls that just get killed by the ocean. So let him just go there. All you have to do, if you want to know what Benj is probably going to go through in Brooklyn, just go to Baseball Reference and type in Ryan Clifford, and then look up what he did with high A, and then how much better he was at the AA level just getting out of that environment.
This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Spring is the season for new beginnings, and it's the best time to get behind the wheel of a sophisticated new Cadillac SUV. The beginning of something exceptional starts now. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer. Remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Leave us a review with a question. We'll look for it for a future mailbag. We love those 5-star reviews. Thank you to everybody that leaves them. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well, where we dive into the comment section and take questions for our mailbag there as well. Another season preview in the books. We're so excited to have everybody along this ride with us once again for what's going to be a really, really exciting 2025 season. A big thank you to Gary Cohen for jumping on the pod today. That will not be his last appearance of the season, which we are very, very excited about to catch up with him. And as always, we'll talk to you next week.